Hi, everyone. This is Patrick Miller with the California Lawyers Association ESG and 5 podcast. I'm here with Jane Obbagy, and she's a specialist in ESG and consultant for many companies. She's been doing this for a long time, and I think she's got a lot of great information we can talk about. So good morning, Jane. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here today. I really look forward to the conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning. Look forward to the dialogue.
Thanks. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career? A lot of us who are involved in the ESG space have gotten into it in the last 5 to 10 years. But I think from our earlier discussions, you've been doing this something akin to ESG for a long time before, when it was called corporate social responsibility or stuff like that. Maybe you can tell us a bit more.
Sure, thank you. I have been involved in the ESG space for a long period of time. It actually started probably over 20 years ago, although it wasn't called ESG at the time. It was primarily called corporate governance, or review of your environmental and social governance or health responsibilities. But how I got started was I had the opportunity to work for a global consulting firm. And at the time, it was really focused on assessing environmental risk and assessing your health and safety risks. And I had the opportunity to travel all over the world and work for a broad number of industrial sectors, and really did a lot of risk assessments. And as those risk assessments expanded over time, you started to look at, well, how are you dealing with the community? How are you dealing with your employees? And it just became an area, although again, for many years until very recently, we didn't call it ESG. We just really called it, how are you managing your environmental and social obligations? And it was very important to senior management to have a feel for how they were managing it. And that's why they were hiring us to look at those programs and practices, provide advice on what they're doing really well, and provide some perspective as to where they might have a few risks that they want to address, or areas where they might want to improve their operations because the trends were changing and they had done some stuff in that area and might be advantageous from a business perspective and a risk management perspective to do a little bit more. So it's an interesting place, and I've enjoyed doing it. And it's really, I have always found that the clients really do want to know. They want to know how they're performing in this area. It's a little bit different from the financial and others, but they have a real interest, because day to day, the people in the operations folks, they deal with the community, they deal with their employees, and they deal with investors, and they deal with private equity. So those questions of some sort were always occurring, and they wanted to be in a good position to answer those questions.
That's really helpful and interesting. I kind of follow-on question I was just wondering is, have you seen those risks expand over the course of the past 20 years? Whereas maybe 20 years ago, you were looking at discrete risks to reputation or potential backlash against some type of litigation, whereas now the risks might have expanded because you have more shareholder activism, you have more stakeholder activism in other forms, you have more investor concern, or have you seen that?
The risks definitely have expanded over time. As you said very clearly, they were very concrete. They wanted, first, many years ago, are your emissions, are you managing your emissions from a factory, or are you managing it from your supply chain? And then it really evolved to, what's the risk from a reputational standpoint if we aren't dealing with the community? Because the community, they want to expand in an area, or they want to hire additional people in the area through some kind of increase in production. And what they really wanted to know is, how's the community viewing us? Or it started at the supply chain. People started asking questions. Well, what's going on in that operation in the faraway places of the world? Do you have a sense of what's going on? And they wanted to get a sense of, well, is there forced labor? Are they treating those employees appropriately? What are the risks to the company if they aren't aware that those things are going on, or will their clientele, will their customers begin to question that? So over many years, it really did expand to include a broader array of issues and more, not only reputation, but also a risk to their overall operations. Because if they were going to lose business because of a reputation issue, it became it became a financial risk as well.
So far we focused on the work you do to help companies de-risk their positions. Another aspect of ESG work is kind of what's positive benefits of this work. And I wanted to ask particularly about your sustainability value index.
Yeah.
Could you maybe tell us a bit more about that?
That was an interesting process we went through in terms of developing that particular tool. And what we were trying to do is create an index where you really put a financial cost on your environmental risk and a financial cost on your social and governance risk. And it turned out that it was much easier in many ways to put a cost on the environmental risk, because you can measure, well, how much water are you using and what's the cost of that water? How much are you recycling and what are the costs associated with recycling? Or waste disposal. If you're recycling, you can get a cost as well. And on your emissions, how much are you paying to control those emissions? How much are you paying if you have an exceedance? When it came to the social side, we had to, what kind of investments were they making? And then we tried to come up with a methodology, and we did come up with a methodology for weighing those investments for the benefits that they were coming up with. And then we come up with a total number of what a financial number of what the value of those practices were. And in many instances, because of the methodology we were using, it was heavily influenced by fossil fuels. So if you were using fossil fuels, it didn't matter if it was coal or natural gas, there was a heavy cost associated with that. So the sustainability value index tended to be weighted more towards the environmental than the health and safety side. But we tried to minimize that by giving a little bit more leverage, if you will, to the health and safety side and the social side to try to balance that out. But it was a number that you come up with, and it was very useful, even though it was sometimes a little bit scary to people to see that number. It was useful because it told them where they were really putting their dollars, their investments in, and they could start once they saw that number. Once it was broken down by individual categories, they can start to make decisions. Well, where do they want to invest in the future? Do they want to start to move out of fossil fuel use? Do they want to invest more in their employee safety programs? They want to invest more in their community investments. Where were those investments going to help them? And that was really a valuable portion of that sustainability value index.
Great, that's really interesting. And now the next question I wanted to ask, first, just to be sure, you have your own consultancy now that you're working with? Are you attached to a larger firm?
I started my own firm. I've been working for a number of companies in the greater Boston area for a long period of time. And then I decided in 2015 that I had always been interested in running a business, to tell you the truth. I mean, as in a consulting, I was running large consulting practices, but even early on, when I just got out of school, I had an interest in starting my own business. So this just became an opportunity to really focus on that. And I created a women-owned business. I was registered, I was certified, and have really enjoyed. It's very different running your own business. There's a lot of you make all the decisions, you live by those decisions. The way you serve your clients probably not a whole lot different than in previous years, but all the decisions you make about where you're going to spend your money, what kind of clients you're going to go after, how are you going to recruit consultants to help you out, are all very challenging, and I've enjoyed it very much. I mean, my business model is really based on tapping other consultants that I will need for certain types of assignments. And that has worked out pretty well, overall. So I've enjoyed it. It's a great, and it's amazing the avenues that opens up to when you're a small business. There are so many networks out there to get involved in. There's a small business association, and there's a bunch of networks in the greater Boston area. There are many networks nationwide. And so you can tap in and learn an awful lot and develop business with others who are operating in the same space that you are. So it's great. I love it.
And so we talked about some of the work you did or over the past 20 years. What are the real challenges that you're helping companies work with today with your firm? What are some of the key things you do? I know you do something like a full body scan for ESG, or maybe you could tell us a bit more.
Yeah, well, as ESG has become sort of in the headlines over the last few years, there's an increasing interest among companies to understand where they are. And the scan is a tool, like the Sustainability Value Index. The scan is a tool to get a quick overview of what they're doing in the ESG space. It looks at, do they have policies in place? Where are they putting their resources? Are they aware of, do they interact with what are their communities telling them? What are their customers telling them about their issues? And it's really a tool to gather a lot of information and look internally at how they're managing those practices and those issues, and to identify areas where they're doing stuff really well, identify areas where there is a potential for them to leverage those practices more for greater good. And that could be business good or social good, whatever they want it to be. And areas where they might have overlooked or not paying as much attention to in the last few years, but are becoming more important. And it's just a way of giving them a sort of a composite, I would say, of what they're doing well and areas they may want to consider focusing a little bit more attention on in the future. And it's, I've dealt with a lot of corporations over the years, and they always want an outside opinion on how they're doing, because they just want confirmation that they're doing okay, that maybe what they were doing, it really is okay. And or maybe I need to improve a little bit in this area. And that's what the scan is all about. And it takes a while to do. It's not an intensive service, but it takes a lot of it. I interview a lot of people when I do the service. I have found that when you interview anybody from the top to the bottom, from the factory floor to the boardroom, you really get a perspective on what's happening in the company, how they're managing it, and it really provides a deeper insight and a more valuable insight to the folks who hired you to perform that review. So it's a good tool. I'm proud of it.
And so you mentioned that some of the clients you work with, they're asking for your services because of their own internal considerations for purposes of reviewing how their practices are redounding to the benefit of environmental issues or social issues, and how they might want to get better. Do you find yourself working on assignments that are inspired because of certain regulations or policies? So for instance, I know you mentioned that you've worked on projects that are financed by the World Bank, and the World Bank finance projects require specific assessments. And you've also worked in the past on issues that arise due to certain reporting requirements in other countries, right? There's a bit of a word salad there, but reporting requirements in other jurisdictions. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that and how you liaise with in-house counsel or other legal teams when you're doing this work.
Okay. Well, first on the World Bank, the World Bank and other donor organizations such as the World Bank have had requirements in place for a long period of time for any major project to be receive funding. There was a rule that you had to conduct an environmental and social assessment, and it's a well-established practice. It's a very good practice because you get to look at the opportunities for improving and mitigating any potential risk before money is actually put on the table and construction starts or whatever the project happens to be. So that's been a driver in the world for a while. If you're going after funds from the World Bank or from the U.S. government or from other donor agencies around the world, there is an increase. Maybe 2-3 years ago, the opportunities were really, people wanted to know what ESG was coming, was in the paper every single day. So there was a general desire to learn what's it all about and how are they doing. But now there's been a whole rash of requirements that have been passed around the world. I mean, if you look at Europe, and if you're doing business in Europe, they have rules about the sustainability rules that far exceed what we have in the US right now. There are disclosure rules, and they're looking at double materiality. They have, so in about a year or two.
Jane, maybe you could just explain double materiality for some of our guests. This is the focus on financial and impact.
Yeah, so you said it right there. That's it. And double materiality is really getting at what are the financial impacts of your practices and what are the social impacts of your practices. So are there any costs or any risks associated with that? And there are the EU requirements really look at double materiality, and there are increasing potential. Let me just direct the International Financial Accounting Standards Board are also passing regulations for those who follow that particular set of accounting rules, that they too might be looking at double materiality. So there's what's the financial impact and what would be a potential social impact from your practices and your investment strategies. And it seems like it's here to stay.
Double materiality. This notion that you're not only considering items that are material from a financial impact assessment, but also what's a material social or environmental impact of a particular action or particular project that a company is working on. And so, for instance, the EU Sustainable Financial Disclosures regulations require companies to have a double materiality outlook where they have both of these considerations and take both of these considerations. And so certain issues might not have a financial impact on a company's performance, but they do have impact on certain stakeholders on the ground.
Yes. Well, maybe this is an example. Let's look at the supply chain. And that's a huge area of investigation right now. Companies are looking at this very closely. From a variety of reasons. And a positive impact might be if they're looking at their supply chain and they're realizing that certain practices going on in the supply chain may cause them a risk down the road, they start to find other avenues to get those goods, get those services so that they minimize the risk. That would be a positive one. From the financial side, it might initially cost a little bit more, but the long-term benefit of engaging in a practice where you may not have a reputational risk or a supply chain disruption because of other concerns arising from that would be a positive. If that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that answers your question. I think that answers pretty well. That's really helpful. So we had a nice conversation about double materiality, and kind of a follow-on question I had to your previous comments about your ESG scan services. Are these reports at the end of it? I'm assuming you produce a report. Are these reports legally privileged? Are they conducted in conjunction with legal staff, or are they usually not privileged?
They generally don't start off as privileged documents. And and unless there's a reason for that, but in most cases it's just done for general information, and they use the information. It's tend not to get into legal matters in those. I mean, it may point out whether there are a few spots that may to be concerned about, but they generally are not privileged documents. However, in many instances, as you noted, work is done in conjunction with a group of people within a company, and in almost all instances, their legal staff is involved in that, partly because they want to make sure that any report that's written is written in a way that's reasonable, that they can defend if they had to defend, or that it's accurate. And one of the things about the scan, and one of the things that I've always practiced, is that the process of finalizing that report goes through many reviews with the client organization, because as best you try to get the information, sometimes you don't always hear it correctly. Sometimes you might have misunderstood something, and there's a back and forth that gives them an opportunity to clarify some things that may not sound exactly right to them, or may not necessarily be consistent with their thinking. And at the end of the day, it's a report that is reflective of what's going on in the organization, but is reviewed internally before it's ever finalized. And it's worked out well. I've done it for many years, and it's worked out very well. There's always that give and take, going back and forth, making sure that whatever conclusions you're drawing are really representative of what's going on.
Yeah, I would imagine if the report is precipitated by a specific event, that event might lead to litigation, and it might be legally privileged in that context because it's a review for the purposes in preparation for the litigation. But if it's a general scan, that might not be the case. One area I was wondering if you've worked with in the past, which is kind of a similar track to what you've been discussing, is the area of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Have you ever done any assignments which were related to investigations around potential FCPA violations?
Indirectly. Certainly when you're working overseas, and I've spent a lot of time working overseas at different industrial sectors, the issues come up, or the topics come up, I should say. But generally, that I have to say, it's probably outside the scope of the capabilities that we bring to a client. It's something, it may come up, you may bring it up, may refer to someone else, if I may answer the question that way.
Yeah, of course. It would get referred to a legal team that's familiar with those issues, or certain on-the-ground staff that are probably more familiar with those issues as well. The interesting thing about some of the work we do on the international stage is that we often are working with local advisors when we're doing our work.
And that's true for all the many of the international clients work for. I mean, they will always have their local legal team there, working with the team that's on the side or at the company's headquarters, wherever it happens to be. And I don't want to leave the impression that we haven't done work under client-time privilege. We have, and generally that comes about because either they are concerned about an issue and don't know whether or not it really is an issue, or they have, it's been brought to their attention and they want some additional information about what's going on. And we've generally, we've worked in that kind of, in many instances, those circumstances. I can't say that much in the ESG space, but more in other areas, a specific health and safety or social issue that's come up, or an environmental issues, but not so much the broad ESG space. I'm sure it will happen over time, but it hasn't at the moment.
So I think you mentioned one of the two key services that you offer are the scan and report and the assessment, and then helping a company operationalize some of the findings of that report. So does that involve trainings, or tell me a bit more about how you
Yeah.
operationalize the findings in your report.
In many instances, companies want to really accelerate what they're doing in the ESG space. So they will ask for training, development of a training program. I can give a couple different examples. One happens to be in the supply chain. They wanted to, many companies want their staffs across the world to be a little bit more aware of what's going on in that area. So they may ask you to develop, and they have asked me to develop training programs that kind of look at the broad set of issues. So if you're out there, you're there because you're just reviewing the operations or you're visiting the site, whatever it happens to be, these are some of the things you might want to be aware of. You're looking to see if there are any potential issues or to gain confirmation that there aren't any issues. And so it's a process of kind of preparing workshops that give them a sense of what those issues are for people who may not necessarily be schooled in ESG, but things they want to look at. And then on the other side, there's also opportunities for dealing with communities. I mean, a lot of companies have been dealing with communities for a long period of time, but there's changeover in the staff, and new people are coming in, and so they may want to develop training programs that get a sense of, well, what's the company's policy towards communities? What are the best practices for trying to outreach to the communities? And what are how do they take that information and use it in the best possible way? And a lot of the training is really focused on not giving them this is what you have to do, but letting them come up with their answers themselves and then discuss as a group and coming up with their own best practices based on their own experience and the experiences of the company in this area. And it's a great opportunity to really spread the word and to really get people more engaged and more aware of the topics that are pressing for the company to deal with.
It sounds like you're letting these individuals solve their problems themselves. You're facilitating a space for them to understand their problems, but they come up with their own particular solutions based on their own industry, their own experiences, their own company and constraints. So it's less of you coming in as a consultant telling them what to do. It's more you explaining what a challenge is that they might not realize is a challenge, and you allow them to come up with some solutions.
That is correct. I have found, and many people that I've worked with have found the same thing. Some of the best ideas for addressing an issue really come from the people who deal with it day in and day out. I mean, they just have a sense of the issues or perspectives that are very useful in that. And there's a lot of energy around that. And so when you can kind of help them capture that energy, there's two things that go on. One, they're very excited about it. And two, it increases the likelihood that they're going to do something about it. So if an idea comes from them,
yeah,
and they get buy-in from it,
yeah,
and they're excited,
they're actually going to want to see that through. They're going to want to show that idea is valid and validate that idea by implementing it. Whereas if it's just another mandate from corporate that they don't think is effective, that they don't buy into, they're probably not going to implement it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember very clearly conducting a training course or designed a training course. It was really a workshop for dealing with communities, and that was you stated that was the concern that was raised initially. How would these people think? What's this corporate trying to tell us how to deal with the people that we deal with every single day? And we were aware of it, the designers, because we'd been to a lot of their operations. We saw how they interacted. We knew that they had a very good pulse of the communities, but they hadn't necessarily thought about it from the sense, I need to have a more structured approach. I need to have a plan. I need to have a strategy for doing that. And so we designed the programs to really get at case studies, short case studies, 15, 20 minutes. They work on it and they come out and they say, wow, yeah, we've been doing that, or maybe we should consider this. And it's a huge opportunity to galvanize everyone to work on a single problem and to really ensure that it is implemented. And I just want to add one other comment. I talked about the back and forth between writing an ESG scan report. And one of the other reasons for doing that is you get buy-in. If you talk to them enough about what you observed, and they come back with comments and you modify, you get a buy-in for what they're doing well and where they might want to enhance some of their practices. And without that, the report just goes on the shelf and they think, oh, that was nice, but they are really part of the process. And I have found that most companies want to be part of the process. And they hear it, they listen to it, they comment on it, and then they're much more eager to implement it because they have buy-in. Like anybody, if you have buy-in into something, you want to do it. And it's just it's a great way of having the company move forward.
Yeah, it's helping the company acknowledge, and you're validating for the company that the steps it's taking are effective and they are useful and they are part of the best practices in the context of whatever industry they're in. So that's helpful.
And just one other thing on the operational side. I mean, in some instances, clients will have a specific issue they want to look at within the ESG space. And sometimes what they will do is sometimes ask you to do some research on a particular topic. And then they will formulate their own strategy based on that. And I give you a case in point. There was working for a large conglomerate, had their operations in a lot of different sectors, but they were very much interested in moving into the energy efficiency space. They had some products that were in that area. And so they wanted to really look at the trends over the next 20, 30 years. Where was this whole climate change, energy efficiency area going? They didn't have the time or the resource to do a lot of the research. So they asked us to do that research, to come up, what are the predictions out there? What are all the scenarios showing? And how do they fit into that space? And that's a different way of galvanizing the troops, if you will, for implementation. But it gave them it was a data input for their own strategy decisions.
I think that's what I'm finding in the course of the past few years, particularly coming at this space as a lawyer. A lot of what I'm doing is working with people like you who are outside specialists or in-house sustainability staff who have an interest in doing this. And then I'm providing some of the legal basis for why it's important that these issues have to be addressed on a priority basis because they're either current regulations or they're about to become subject to regulatory oversight. And then these are some issues that are best practices in the field. And so I, as a lawyer, will give the kind of baseline architecture for what has to be done. And then consultants like you or other sustainability professionals that might be already in-house will then operationalize that framework that we've created.
And just one other comment on the legal side. I think in the last 6 months, but it's probably longer than that. I think there's been an increased awareness of the legal issues associated with ESG. And I'll give you examples. In the Boston area, we have requirements for the real estate industry to report on their carbon emissions and their water use. And so there's penalty for not reporting, but there's no, like, you have to reduce it by so much. It's just more reporting. So there's a regulatory obligation to do that. And we're seeing that in the federal government, their proposed FAR regulations, federal acquisition requirements, that you have to report on your ESG activities. And in Massachusetts, our new governor just said she's thinking about that as well. So, and then we have all the activity going on in the European side. I mean, the number of rules that are coming out there, they just passed a carbon tax products that are manufactured outside the EU area. There's a tax being put on them to level out the playing field for those that are manufactured in the EU, because there's a higher cost there. And they're increasing their emission trading program. We have the EPA. They haven't come out this week yet, but they were supposedly coming out with new carbon rules. And so there are a lot of factors going on the legal side that are also kind of propelling ESG in a space differently than it was a year ago, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. A few years ago, a lot of the work you were doing is because it would reduce risks down the road. It would be financially beneficial. It would be helpful to your growth, and sometimes just and I think we've discussed this previously. You found that the companies that are at the cutting edge in best practices in ESG, they're generally at the cutting edge of a lot of different
Yeah,
topics, and they're generally leaders in the space. Is that fair to say?
yeah, yeah. That whole theory and it's true how you link good management with ESG has been around for a long period of time. And I, in fact, had done some studies. I was working with a company in the Middle East many years ago that were interested in joining the World Trade Organization. And at that time, the World Trade Organization was requiring any new members to have a certain performance in the environmental space. And they weren't really focused on health and safety at that time. And I spent a fair amount of time conducting research. And what you found was there were many studies early on showing that companies that were doing very well financially were also managing their environmental health and safety and social risks very well. It seems that there is a connection. It's integral to how they are managing a company. And so that is really, I think, here to stay. Those companies, and I found that over and over and over again, companies that are managing their operations well, their finances well, are probably also managing ESG pretty well, because it's just part and parcel of how they operate. They want to, they want their operations well managed.
Well managed, well run. They're at the cutting edge of these issues, and so you're not saying that it's necessarily causative. I'll put that aside for the statisticians. That's something that I can't do myself, but there's certainly a correlation.
Yes, there's definitely a correlation, and there are many studies that have demonstrated that there is a correlation between managing ESG well and managing your operations. Again, I think that based on my experience, when you're looking at companies, they've internalized how they manage that area, and it's just like anything else. They're managing it, and it's like they manage their supply chain. They're managing ESG, and it's really integral how they run the company, where they want to go in the future, and probably they recognize it as a risk, as any risk, and they want to manage it well to minimize that risk and to really kind of continue and be successful in the future.
Thanks.
And more companies are beginning to realize. I mean, a lot of large companies have already realized and made that connection, and they've been doing this for a long period of time. What I think has changed over the last few years is smaller companies are beginning to understand there is that connection. They didn't necessarily have that, they weren't thinking about it necessarily, but as it's become more and more of a topic, they've begun to see their connections there. And that's why they're interested in understanding how they're doing, because they want to, be in the same playing field as everybody else.
So just a couple final questions for you. I really appreciate you coming on today and telling us so much about your experiences and the work that you're doing. Are there any articles you're working on right now, or any articles you've recently published on any of these topics that we might want to look out for?
I will be releasing an article next week on kind of evaluating your environmental health and safety practices. It doesn't go into a whole lot of detail, but it does touch on the major issues. I've written a few. One of the articles I've written that I'm quite proud of is really tapping your employees as ambassadors. The employees have a huge opportunity of interacting with the public every single day. When you think about it, they go to the supermarket, they go shopping, they go to the gym, they're watching their kids play baseball, football, whatever it happens to be. They're constantly interacting with the public in different areas, and yet they're also and in the day-to-day conversation, people ask, well, who do you work for? What do you do? So it's a huge opportunity for employees to be ambassadors for the company in the ESG space. And a lot of companies are beginning to realize the value that that has in their overall reputation, and also from just a general nurturing of their employee population. People want to be proud of who they work for. And so making that link was something I observed a while ago, and it's one of the articles that I'm pretty proud about, or to really focus on that. But then there's the one on sustainability value index. There's one on core. I have one on core values. Did a study a while ago that Larry looked at core values of companies and how that translates into ESG practices. And it's pretty clear. That will be coming out in a few months as well.
Okay. Well, I'd love to, if you have links to these articles, we'd love to put them up in the show notes for other people if they want to link to them.
Sure.
And then one final question, and we've touched on a number of areas, but maybe we could just summarize some of the points you think. Where do you see some future areas or topics in ESG in the law that you think we should keep our eye on over the course of the next 6 months, year?
I definitely think the whole area of carbon disclosures will be an area that will require a fair amount of attention from the legal community. I think it's pretty clear that we're going to have carbon disclosure rules. Voluntary rules have been around or practice have been around for a long time. We're seeing that coming at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, and at the international level. And how well those are reported and how clear the impacts are described, I think will be interesting area to look at. I think the whole area of employee development is another one. There's such a huge attention to that now, but I don't think that's going away either. I think what happened with the pandemic, people began to look at their jobs, look at how they're being treated, looking at the corporations they work for, and what do they want out of it? How do they want to progress? What are the opportunities for them? I think that's another area that there'll be some connection to the legal departments and companies and to the attorneys of the world. I also think there'll be areas with supply chain. I'm not sure I can fully articulate that, but I think from an international point of view, that's not going away either. That's going to continue to surface because people are more aware of manufacturing practices or working conditions around the world within the last 5 years, but also within the last year. There's just much more awareness of it with all the media out there and opportunity to read. I think that's another area that will receive increased attention.
I think you're playing to your audience, Jane. You know that supply chain is very near and dear to me, and I'm certainly aware and cognizant of all of the varying supply chain rules in the EU, Japan, Australia, the US. There are more coming online, and the regulations are becoming in force, and companies are now beginning to really implement those regulations, and how they're going to respond to them over the course of the next 5 years is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, just at the point, about 2 summers ago, I had the opportunity to spend some time with a very large pharmaceutical company, and we were looking at and talking about supply chain issues. And there's a lot of activity in that area already, and they know that's an area that they're going to have to spend more and more time looking at, because it just is, it's here to stay. Everybody uses supply chains, and it's a big issue, and they're sourcing from around the world. So it's an interesting issue.
Yeah. I mean, so there are all different areas related to supply chain. So there's legal areas related to forced labor, human rights issues, environmental concerns, and then there's just efficiency concerns related to just-in-time production and whether or not there are any particular areas in the supply chain that can act as kinks that need to be navigated as well. So companies having a firm and sophisticated grasp of their supply chain is just part of the future and good management practices. It goes back to something that we were discussing earlier. There's adhering to regulations, which represent kind of a baseline for how you should conduct yourselves. But then the more sophisticated companies, the best actors in the space, are going above those thresholds because they want to be efficient managers.
Yes, and I think, in many instances, the more you learn, the more you understand what's going on. And I think sometimes I think a lot of times people weren't always aware of the conditions within their supply chain. I mean, I think that's in my opinion, it's a fair statement. And they weren't always aware of it because you didn't necessarily have all the avenues to understand that, but now we do. And I think there's, as the awareness has grown, it's an area that I'm sure there'll be a lot of legal issues that arise.
Yeah, that's one of my mantras, is that with the new human rights due diligence laws around the world, the era of ignorance is over. Companies now are having to wrap their arms around their supply chain and really focus in on the effects that they might have on stakeholders down their supply chain. And once they have an understanding of what's going on, the next step is how do we remediate whatever issues we discover. But that's an issue for another podcast. You've been very generous with your time, and I really appreciate you coming on today. Is there anything final you wanted to say? I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I do think that ESG is an area that's here to stay. I know there's been a lot of backlash, but I do think that most companies, whether you're large or small, understand that it is an issue that they want to manage effectively because it's part of their future and it's part of their sustainable future. They want to be able to recruit employees, and employees want to work for companies that they respect. They want to be able to go out to their community and saying, we have a pretty good record in this area. They want to be able to go out to their investors or their banks and tell them that, our practices are pretty good, because they are really looking for the future and looking towards the future and looking to make sure that they're managing it as they manage other aspects. So I think it's here to stay, and a great area for not only consultants, but companies, but for attorneys as well.
Well, I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that. Thanks again for coming on today, Jane. You have a good rest of your Friday.
You too. Bye-bye.